Welcome to part 2 of Lessons from the Ice, our conversation with Kate Koons. In the previous episode, I had just asked Kate something that she had brought over from her work in other industries, like avalanche education, and how she was applying those concepts to the work that she does in the Antarctic. Let's tune back in to part 2 and hear Kate's answer to that question.
Well, that's a great question. I mean, the field planning process, like as a whole, I didn't necessarily start that. A number of years ago, our search and rescue supervisor really kind of implemented this process, and I've just improved upon it. But I think I think of that as our operational risk management plan that maybe like an avalanche school provider would have in their paperwork. Like, this is our emergency response plan. This is how we operationally like manage our risk. And then what's an expectation for teams on the ground every single day is either enter your info into InfoX or you're doing your guides AM meeting. And that's something that's been really successful in Antarctica because it's like quick, it's pretty easy to do, and it just gives people information. And I think we can all agree that generally when there is good information communicated well, people generally thrive in those environments. So if we can, what's the need to knows for each day? And then how do we come back to that at night? That's been really helpful. What else? Honestly, I'll say the 7 leadership skills from Knowles. I think that they all, judgment, decision making, self-awareness, communication, all of them, I can easily, if I just write them all out, I can then just draw bullet points to everything that we're doing. And I think that's one thing we don't spend a lot of time on is building leadership skills and training within our team. So I just 2 weeks ago led we have a bi-weekly all field staff meeting. And typically we spend that time kind of just talking about like updates and whatnot. And so a few of us were like, it'd be really beneficial to kind of do some like professional development for all these 3/4 time full-time staff. So we did, I led us through like a conflict resolution, like little webinar, and where we all got to like talk about things and just to put more tools in their pocket because we deal with so many logistics that are constantly changing. Plans A, B, C, D, E have already fallen through and we're on to T. And it's a lot for our supervisors and our managers. And so where are the tools in the box to use so that they're not just relying on managers to come up with a solution? And so I think that, Knowles' model of the 4 leadership styles, the 7 skills, and then the one kind of your specific style is something that I try and weave into everything that I'm doing because I don't think risk management happens without leadership. If you just hand somebody a bunch of SOPs, you're like, cool, that's boring, like, thanks for the reading material. But how does that actually get implemented on a daily basis in a way that's accessible, that's understandable, and that uses like what you talk about, like the human operational performance piece? Like, is this actually what you're doing on the ground? Like engaging everybody at every level. So I think, yeah, I feel like a ton from the avalanche world because the avalanche world has also really kind of moved away. When I took my level 1 100 years ago, we were looking at pictures of snow crystals on an overhead projector. You remember that? Like some people who are listening to this might be like, what is that? But I remember being like, I am going to die in an avalanche because I don't know snow science. Like, this is bananas. This is supposed to be like my intro to snow or, avalanche world. And now level 1s are like, let's talk about decision making. Let's talk about us as humans and the human dynamic. And so that is what I bring a lot of, it's like, we know the logistics really well, but how do we make decisions? When do they get messy? What are the skills that we need to help manage that? Okay, let's just like back up. If I'm like a ski guide operation, I'm operating my little team of guides and, I have to interact with my clients and I maybe have to interact with the land managers. But generally speaking, I've got like my organization, we operate according to our operational risk management plan. We are working with our aircraft. We've got the Air National Guard who they fly all of our planes to and from Christchurch down to McMurdo. So we have to operate on their rules. And sometimes they're a little bit different from how we would operate. And I mean, they're not so different that it would be this huge safety piece, but we have to adjust, and like sometimes the conversations and all of the paperwork and the things that happens in between to then, the helicopter operator, totally different company. Our small fixed wing, totally different company.
Hmm.
So we've got all these different
Hmm.
people who, if we go back to that kind of competing priorities, I think things are just a little bit more complicated and complex. So you feel a little bit more nimble when you're in a smaller organization and you're kind of just one organization, and that organization is responsible for making the decision. And oftentimes I may say, this is what I think is best. And I have to ask the National Science Foundation, who funds all of this, do you agree with me? And I'm not saying anything bad about the NSF. They have their own priorities, but they have to weigh in. So there's layers of complexity that slow down the decision making oftentimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm imagining the AcciMap right now, after something, maybe something hasn't even necessarily gone wrong, but just to
Right.
understand the AcciMap of what is normal, right? And the
Yeah.
interrelationship between all of those different layers. And the thing about the AcciMap model, it starts with the government level at the top, and then it goes all the way down to the field or the, piece of equipment or the weather on that given day. And you're talking about lots of information on that government level, that highest
Totally.
level, right? That's going to be rippling down all the way to the crevasses and the weather and I don't know if you've got leopard seals or what you've got down there.
I think you've heard me say this, but so there's a very robust safety department, and sometimes we refer to them as capital S safety. Like they're the Office of Polar Programs has a safety program, and, it's OSHA, it's all of these things. And then I kind of like operate in this like field zone. And I think what's been really cool is that people have been really open to this whole other world of field risk. And so when I'm in a meeting with NSF and safety folks, and I'm bringing about these like, well, hey, we can talk about, this is the rule or this is the job hazard analysis, but what about the person who's doing the thing? Like, that's a really important part of this equation.
I remember when you got this job, I wrote to you that week. I was so excited for you. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
this is so cool to imagine all the skills and experience and energy that you're going to bring to this unique environment with all the complexities. And what you're describing there, in my mind, correct me if I'm misinterpreting what you're saying, but I'm hearing you making a really useful distinction between managing liability and managing actual operational safety, right? Like the paperwork that we have to fill out or the forms, or maybe even what some people have called safety clutter, which is some of the forms that need to be filled out in triplicate versus the actual difference between what the job hazard analysis says and the human beings who are going to be out in dynamic and complex environments making decisions that are life critical decisions, in imperfect ways that may not look the same as what was described on the form that someone in an office filled out weeks earlier, right? So am I getting some of that right?
No, absolutely. And I think, and that's not to say I'm not throwing the safety people under the bus here. Their role is very important. And I've learned a lot from working with them and understanding kind of this OSHA industrial lens and the importance for like very specific techniques and process around that. And I think when I first came into my role, there was somebody from the safety team who was the safety field person. And they didn't really have a whole lot of field experience. And so I viewed my job as being the translator. And then I started going to a lot of these meetings with other folks where I was like, well, this is how it works in field. Because it was almost like they were trying to impose something that didn't really make sense for the environment in which it was working, right? Like, we can't just do all this. Like, clearly, if you're going to operate a crane in the field, we're going to operate it as per OSHA guidelines, but we're probably going to need to make some adjustments for getting it there and how, all these things. But I laugh, and I think I go back to maybe what I said at the beginning of I've created this like thing, because sometimes people are like, wow, all this leadership stuff is just really amazing, or like the things from the avalanche world. And I'm like, I need to continue to remind you, I did not make this stuff up. It's not like I just woke up and was like, I have this big idea. And so I like to think that I'm recontextualizing really important information and making it work for our program. And for the most part, it works. And some of it I've had to really socialize hard with people like in my inner circle and kind of sell it. And then, it kind of ripples up. But But yeah, it's been a really cool melding of those two things. And I think there's been a lot of learning on both ends. And so there are things that the safety department now utilizes that, like they're talking about the stress continuum and, which wasn't really something that was utilized in their world. And what that means is the rest of McMurdo, who doesn't necessarily go into the field, is using the stress continuum as a safety moment before they start work each day.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's been a really amazing opportunity to take these concepts that have really helped, responders, Responder Alliance, people who've been involved in avalanche incidents, manage them, to take all those concepts because they're really universally quite useful in all situations. So, yeah.
Well, I think that last little segment really embodies so much of the leadership that you bring, Kate, because you pay attention not just to what's happening in your immediate world, but to what's going on by learning from other organizations and going to national conferences on risk management and tuning into the difference between how we are doing it these days versus what it was like when you and I started doing this work,
Yeah.
back in the day. And I think you've brought up so many great examples of, how our industry continues to grow and evolve and get better at what we're doing, not just with physical safety and paperwork, but with all the things, that you've mentioned. So coming back to your story, the fellow slips on the blue ice and goes over the edge, and there's this dramatic response. I have to ask you the penultimate question, which is, were we lucky or were we good in that story?
We were lucky. Yeah, we were lucky. I mean, for a number of reasons. We were lucky that his fall wasn't as far, but it was still over 20 feet. So kind of miraculous that he only broke his ankles. I mean, they were pretty shattered, but he was lucky that the snow machine didn't land on top of him or mangle him up on the way down. We were lucky in that the team of two happened to be close by and popped up on the ridge at that moment to be able to be line of sight for the radios, because it wasn't necessarily in their plan. Like, we're going to keep checking in throughout the day. It was like, hey, we're going to go out and do this thing and then we're going to come back. So I think that's where we were lucky. So I guess maybe it was lucky and good, right? So up until that point, we were lucky. And then we were good because that safety net, the safety margin that is very large, working in Antarctica, came through in exactly the way you want it to come through. And so we are going to have moments like that of, maybe it would be a near miss of like, he was fine, like nothing happened, but they tried to use the sat phone and the one guy didn't know how to use it. And it was like, okay, well now we need to find a repeater or whatnot. And that would be a near miss to me. Like, somebody doesn't know how to use the communication device. That's a near miss. But yeah, so I think it's both. It was unfortunate, very lucky, and then really good. I think everybody commended the woman, the other lead scientist, who just so calm, gave the information in a super concise way, knew exactly what needed to happen, and it all happened. Everybody showed up, the resources were available, and he was able to get the help that he needed and then returned to the ice many years later to, help shepherd in a new crew of people and use that incident as a really good way to train people in the field, which I think we all learn more when we can like read something tangible. This happened to somebody. I don't want it to happen to you. And that somebody was me, right? For him. So, yeah.
And by coming on the podcast and sharing the story and unpacking it in the way that you have, not only does that person's story benefit the people in the Antarctic, but now it benefits all of our listeners as well. So great job. Really appreciate you being forthcoming and sharing all that and just all the experience and the insights that you bring to the work that you're doing in such a remarkable and complex and dynamic environment that's continuing, to change before our eyes. Well, thanks, Kate, for being my guest. And to all of you folks for listening, remember, despite the show's title, we can be lucky and good, much like Kate's story here today, but relying on luck is not a risk management strategy. If you would like to be a guest on our show, please check out the show notes and learn more about how to be a guest at luckyorgoodpodcast.com. Kate, thanks so much for being here with us today.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I think it's always great to kind of come back to a talk like this to it, it helps me. I'm going to go back to my computer and work. And you're like, right, this is what I'm doing. Sometimes when you're just typing away at things and thinking about these things on kind of like a theoretical scale. But you and I wouldn't be here if we didn't have so many lucky moments. And I think that,
No doubt.
and the people that we continue to recreate with, and I was just out with a bunch of girlfriends in the mountains and there was a lot more snow and, it was definitely some like real terrain for us. And one of my friends said to me, like, I am so glad to be with you all right now. Like, just, we all know how to read terrain because you couldn't see the trail, it's just fully snow covered. And we were all just like reflecting on that. We've had lots of lucky moments and we will continue to have those, but I'd like to think that we're getting better, gooder. I don't know.
Yep.
But I think there's still gonna be the elements of lucky and good, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I love that you're doing this podcast and I love hearing all the stories that people I love hearing the learning. Some of the stories sometimes are not, it's not the outcome that we want, but we can still learn from those.
Absolutely. Yes. And, getting back to the lucky or good question, it's kind of a false binary because almost every show so far, it's been both. And I think that's what makes the show possibly useful is that we need to not confuse the two, right?
Yeah.
The fellow who became complacent on his snow machine, maybe he was too comfortable being lucky and normalizing riding right on that edge, between the safety margin. And how can we use stories like this and not just interrogate what goes wrong, but interrogate our successes and what goes right every day.
Absolutely.
And learn to convert lucky into good and not to confuse those two things, you know? So that's my hope. So the show title is kind of a false binary, but it really is useful to think about the difference between lucky and good and to try to convert lucky into good, or to at least, there's a saying that fortune favors the prepared, so that by being good, we can make some luck for ourselves.
Yeah. And I think money in the bank. Yeah.
Yeah. And if that's true, then the opposite may also be true, that if we're not doing the prior planning and not bringing the right equipment and not having the right partners and not having a psychologically safe space and not debriefing and learning from our trips, then we're building up the bank is full of bad luck.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's my hope that we can explore it like that.
Yeah. This is the last thing I'll say is one of my mentors in the avalanche world is Lynn Wolfe. And she was the longtime editor of the Avalanche Review. And she would ask a very similar, do we make good decisions or do we get away with it? So it's basically the same thing. And I really instill this upon people in Antarctica to, at the end of the day, ask this question: were you lucky or were you good? And they can whiteboard it. And are they all on the same page? Because if somebody thinks that they were like being really good and somebody else thinks it's lucky, so I think it's a wonderful question.
Some great learning
great learning
dialogue. If one person thinks we did everything right today, and another person's like, oh,
wait a second,
I got a thing.
Absolutely.
That's where really useful. And that's how I think we convert. That's where we may be confusing lucky and good. Right.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So, Kate, this was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thanks again for the great conversation and look forward to seeing you sometime again soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you.